Good morning. As Michele mentioned, I will dive a bit more into the technical aspects, so not that much on the process, and not that much on the political aspects. We are doing that in a team, of course. My colleagues Karen and Erwin have heavily contributed. Others as well have contributed over time, which are not listed here. So it's not only me, it's a group in the JRC. I will briefly talk to you to make clear again the difference to the policy guys in Brussels, where we are from, what we are doing, the Joint Research Center. And then I will go into the technical aspects of the PEFCR development, definition of scope of a product category, representative product model, PEF screening, draft PEFCR, what are PEFCR supporting studies, benchmarks, and come up with hopefully some meaningful conclusions. The Joint Research Center basically is a kind of a scientific technical support to the European Commission policies. We are involved, as the name says, a lot in research areas, so as well in the European research area. And of course, we will be heavily involved as well in Horizon 2020 upcoming. We are part of the European Commission as DG Environment, as DG Enterprise, as DG Agri. So under Manuel Barroso, basically, we have a Commissioner, Mary Gogin-Quinn. She's responsible for both, for RTD and JRC, and our Director General is Dominique Ristori. Now, I'm coming from the Institute for Environment and Sustainability in ISPRA. We are part of the JRC, one of 7 institutes, and our mission is really to provide support to EC policies on sustainability aspects in a global context. So from the aspects of the environment, we are not limited to Europe, and that's rightly so because supply chains happen not to be European-based only. Now I come to the first point on the PEFCR development, how to define a product category, what do we mean with that? And there are quite some issues already with that, which you might think is relatively easy because there are a lot of PCRs out there, so it shouldn't be too difficult. Of course, we have the approach to say, well, it should be based on existing CPA NACE codes, which is a general way to classify industry into different sectors. But as well, of course, for us, it's very important to see, right, how broad do you define that? So do you want to have it defined like for intermediates, it may be necessary on a material basis, so like for plastics, for paper, for different plastics maybe, for glass, steel. Do we want to have it based more in tune with life cycle assessment as a function of the functional unit kind of approach? So a beverage container for 1 liter, transport of 1 person over 1 kilometer. Or do we go even broader, like a lot of, let's say, top-down approaches have done it and go, no, we want to deal with really the human needs which are out there, like food, housing, warmth, or heating, something like that. Of course, we will focus very much, I think, on the function approach where possible. And we will go to something which is more in the line of materials, characteristics, especially for intermediate, so where we are talking not about a finished product. But there will be issues coming up on how exactly to define that. Just one possibility of conflicts you can see if you have products like a plastic cup, like a paper cup. Both can satisfy the same need, so both would fall under the same product category. They have a very different supply chain, a very different life cycle. So you need to go through all the technical steps looking at completely different life cycles. That will pose a challenge for identifying all the things we want to identify, like what is the most important life cycle stage, what is the most important processes, what are the most important environmental impacts. Of course, that will differ if you look at paper versus glass, versus steel versus plastic. In general, the approach should be, well, those should probably be in the same PEFCR category. But then you have the question, well, what about the ceramic mug, which has hundreds of uses? So very often one of the questions will be, do we have products which have a single use versus a multiple use? And then you need to make a decision, should they be in the same product category under a PEFCR development or not? And there's no answer yet. So there are pros and cons. Just here, the classification, according to Ramon, I think has done that as well somewhere. That you see that even if you go for a ceramic cup and a plastic cup, normally you would end up in very different product categories because they start off already very differently. So we need to have some kind of linking really from a functional approach, different product categories which normally you would not put under one category. So the challenges as I see them, and again, as I mentioned yesterday already to Michael as well, there are no necessary solutions yet. It is basically the question how to define a product category broad enough to allow meaningful comparisons. So I don't want to have a product category which is so specific that I can twist basically only based on 0.1% change of the ingredients in a shampoo. That does not make sense. So it must be broad enough to capture, to allow meaningful comparisons of products which are on the market which have the same function. Whether they do it in exactly 100% the same performance or not is a different question and a tricky one as well. On the other hand, if you start off and say, well, let's look at packaging, beverage container for 1 liter makes a product category, and you say, well, everything has to be included which could possibly be used for carrying 1 liter of beverages, and you end up more or less with the whole packaging world in one product category. No offense, but probably it will be a very difficult manageable process because you have a lot of stakeholder meetings, consultations, and you would agree with everybody basically from a variety of process chains on agreeing on a lot of things which they have very different opinions on, are used to very different things. And it may simply from a process be very difficult to manage. Of course, if you have different co-products which go into different product categories, you need to make sure that they are treated in a similar way. You cannot allow for example, I would see it as a not visual result that, for example, metals would be treated differently depending on whether you look at them in the building context versus you look at them in a packaging context. So as well there is a consistency problem. It's not only consistency necessarily within one product category, but if different things are used in different product categories, how do you ensure that they are not treated completely differently and arbitrarily if they are looked at in a different product category context? So there's a lot of governance to do on that kind of level on how to ensure consistency. And the steering committee and the attached technical advisory board will be very important in that context for sure. I mentioned already the 2 points, intermediate products, probably you cannot go for a function approach, you have to stay probably on a kilogram or material characteristic level. And multifunctionality, of course, is as well important, that if you have some products in a product category which have different functions on top of the main function and others not, you need to really define exactly what is the main function I want to consider in that product category, and how do I then, if you want, allocate or separate other functions, additional functions on top away from that. So that really in one product category you have the function clearly defined. Now to the point, what would we like to see as a kind of a basis as well for a screening PEF? And that is what we have called a representative product. What is an input to that? So it can be, of course, that it is a real product, but it can be as well that it is not a real product on the market, but some kind of synthetical, hypothetical product which you build together out of market averages, out of sales turnover. So basically, I think that is more likely that that will be the case for many product categories, that you have a kind of a virtual product which you hope represents the average situation on the market in the EU. So it should give you a result of modeling of what happens within the EU on the market. It should provide you with a bill of materials. So you need to be able from that defined representative product to define exactly what has gone into it. Of course, you need to know as well on that average product, representative product level, how has it come together? So you need to have a flow diagram, a process chart attached to it. And you need to make assumptions clearly spelled out on things which you don't see in the bill of materials, but which come with the transportation, the use, and especially the end of life of that kind of representative product. And again, valid for EU average conditions. That goes basically then in what we call a PEF screening. That is more or less done to pre-identify the most relevant life cycle stages and the most relevant processes within the life cycle. And you will have input data from varied sources, basically, which is possible, and you should try in the wake of the whole process, of the whole pilot, to improve on your data. So it's kind of an iterative process. Of course, it goes in the representative product model and the model. You have a PEF screening according to the PEF method as a baseline, but it's called a screening, so you don't have to full-scale PEF to do that one. You can, in addition, have it based on existing information, so it will be very important to go through as well existing PCRs, to look in existing market surveys and existing LCAs in which you have faith in, quite frankly. And it is as well important that it is allowed, in addition to the baseline as a PEF screening, to use completely different approaches. So, for example, if you have a top-down approach like extended environmental input-output, you might as well try to define the average representative product and what it would mean for that in environmental terms with that approach. But then you will still need to do this PEF screening as well, and then you can compare. But I think that's why we do a pilot. We are open. We want to see other approaches which might be easier. If they come out in a similar ballpark, I think we will have some thinking to do what is the best approach, quite frankly. And of course, very important in the whole process, I think Michele stressed that as well a lot, the process is very important here, that the data should always have an input if they come from stakeholders in the stakeholder process. So you will go out from a technical secretariat with a first model, with first data, maybe with first results on a screening, and then you will collect feedback from the stakeholders. And that feedback is very important to us. The output of the PEF screening will be basically used as a kind of a draft backbone for the PEFCR, which has to deal with all the things you will discover in the PEF screening, which are important, and hopefully as well where you can really reliably say, well, I really don't have to care about certain things. I don't have to care about certain life cycle stages or certain processes, because the objective is to make your life easier, not more complicated. The draft PEFCR, I think Michele mentioned, it more or less should provide really very clear guidance on a lot of technical issues which you have to deal with if you have a life cycle approach, which of course we tried to deal with when we wrote the general guidance of the PEF and the OEF. But of course you can be only relevant and specific if you have a specific product category in mind. So that is basically a place for the PEFCRs to really be more specific and more relevant than the general PEF guide. And that applies basically throughout the whole life cycle. So you need to look into the goal and scope. You need to exactly define what is the unit of analysis, system boundaries, how to create a resource use and emission profile, so basically in LCA terms, a life cycle inventory, how to do an impact assessment, so basically the life cycle impact assessment phase, what kind of additional environmental information may be relevant for that product category. So it's not always that LCA even covers all relevant environmental issues, apart from economic and social issues. But we are aware that some issues, like noise, like biodiversity, really in terms of problems related to land use things, are not well covered in life cycle at the moment. So you may have additional environmental information which goes beyond the life cycle approach, and that should be fixed as well. Do you have for your product category knowledge that you know certain points will not be covered by a PEF or a life cycle? Then you have to put it in and maybe make it mandatory for companies doing a product or even an organization environmental footprint to go out with that kind of information on top of the life cycle information. Data quality requirements will have to be specified as well in the PEFCR, and the use of secondary data should be specified. Now on the use of secondary data, at the moment we have here a kind of a list where we say, okay, during the pilots, you should specify how you get your secondary data. And of course, the first priority will be, well, it should be compliant with the PEF requirements, and it should be free and public databases. And if you go out today and look for those, you may find a little, but you will not find a lot. Second is, at the moment, PEF compliant data. Yes, from the quality, that's what we need, that's what we want, but maybe from commercial databases. And as well, as Michele already mentioned, for the pilots, this is a possibility. I do not see anything from the Commission coming out where we could say, you have to use that in that commercial database. I don't think it will ever happen. I know that the standardization process also would not be able to do that. For the pilots, I think it's okay, as well as for us, important to know where would most of the PEFCRs agree with that this is a high quality data that they should use. Of course, then afterwards come those data which at the moment is not compliant with the PEF quality criteria, but you have to use them because there's nothing out there which is PEF compliant. And there as well, of course, the priority is, well, then use it at least from free and public available databases, and if that is not possible, then from commercial databases. The data and data quality requirements in a PEFCR as well, of course, should make very clear where, from a view of the product category, it's okay to go with secondary data. You don't have to bother with your supply chain because we know it's not that relevant after all, or we know the differences might not be that significant between different suppliers, between different players in that supply chain. And of course, it should be very clear on if you produce a product and put it on the market, where do you have to put your own data in, your foreground data, your really specific data. And as well, the PEFCR should specify or can specify further what is meant in the PEF under the data quality criteria, which are case dependent, and that mainly relates to time, geography, and technology. So the PEFCR is the right point for a product category to specify how old can data be, how representative a specific process mix, production mix needs to be reflected, and what kind of geographies need to be reflected in the data. Because again, in the PEF we have general requirements, but they are general, there's a general score attached to it, but we cannot be that specific to be meaningful for any specific category. Then we come to the PEFCR supporting studies. So once you have your draft of a PEFCR in a pretty final stage, industry will be asked to have at least 3, and we will have to see that how much more we would like to see in very diverse product categories, but at least 3 real studies, real PEFs on real products on the market. Of course, in those studies, you need to be comprehensive in what you do. So you cannot do already all the shortcuts which we foresee for the final version then, but you in that study have to be still comprehensive regarding life cycle stages, regarding processes, and regarding environmental impact categories. At that stage as well, normalization and weighting will be included. And I think there will be further specifications on how exactly that will be done. What is the expected output of these PEFCR supporting studies? It really should lead to the final identification of the relevant life cycle stages, of the relevant processes, of the relevant impact categories, and it will be used to support the benchmarking. So of course, if you have from the PEF screening, if you remember, it should be on a representative product with a representative model. If you see that as a kind of the middle of the balls or curves, which were yesterday mentioned by Michele and others several times, If you then have a few products somewhere spotted around, you will get already a feeling for, well, okay, is a difference of 10%? Is that usual in that product category? Is it normally more a factor of 2 or a factor of 3? Which can be, I think, very different for very different product categories. So it will be used to support the benchmarking. Now, a bit more on how to identify those benchmarks. So as I said, it will be based on what you have done for the PEF screening on a representative product model. It will be based on the at least 3 PEFs support or PEFCR supporting studies. It should give you an indication on the uncertainty as well, a bit related to that product category for different results. I would expect that that will differ as well from impact category to impact category. It should lead as well to an indication, well, what would I need to see in different results from a PEF based on the same PEFCR to be able to say, well, there is a meaningful difference. So this question, how different have results to be significant? That as well you can get only out on a product category level. And as well, although I think it is not yet explicitly mentioned, probably I think those benchmarks and the grading will have to be agreed as well from in the steering committee. But that is again at the moment not fixed, but probably because it will have a big impact on the players in those pilots, and as well in real life. I think that is probably something which would need to run as well, at least through some kind of process, whether it's a steering committee or not. Then something where we said, well, okay, we are doing a lot of work. We are trying to involve a lot of stakeholders. We ourselves from the JRC will be involved in leading 3+3 of those pilots, so 6. But probably not a bad idea to have an external look at what you have done, even if you think you have been pretty comprehensive and pretty good. So we will have a panel of at least 3 external reviewers who will review the PEFCR. So not a study based on it, but the PEFCR itself. So it's not to be confused with the verification of the PEF studies coming out of that at some point, which are used for communication. But we really want to have an external review as well of the basis for all those PEF studies to be sure that that is okay. Preferably as well, we would like to see a multi-stakeholder mix in that. But there we will have to see how far we get. Whether that will be a 1-1-1, we have to see. What should be checked, of course, in a review? Pretty clear. One is check against the PEF guidelines and whether the PEFCR guidelines on how to develop it have been followed. From their expertise, and that becomes clear already, we must be careful in the selection of the peer reviewers that they really have expertise somewhat in that sector, because they should check as well, well, is it logic? Is it reasonable? Is it intuitive? Is it based on experience that those selected processes, those selected life cycle stages, and those selected impact categories are really the ones which you should look at in that product category? Has nothing slipped through? Of course, as well, on the additional environmental information, is everything provided and included in the product category rules, PEFCRs, which should be in there? So really a top-down approach on has nothing important overlooked. The result of the review, of course, goes into the technical secretariat, into the whole process of revising the PEFCRs. And again, if there's a disagreement between the reviewers and the technical secretariat, which can happen. I mean, in all review processes, be it a paper, be it a study, you have points where you agree as a commissioner or as the conductor of the study and say, yes, I will change. And you have points where you say, nah, I don't think so. From my experience, I don't agree. And then you have a conflict between a reviewer and the study maker, technical secretariat, industry, whoever. And that basically is as well, if it gets to that level, it goes to the steering committee and the attached technical advisory board for conflict resolution, basically. Conclusions. How do I see the role and objectives of PEFCRs? They have to increase the relevance, the robustness, consistency, comparability of the results of PEF studies for a given product category. If they don't achieve that, it was pointless. As much important, I think, it is they have to increase the efficiency of doing PEF studies. They have to reduce time, effort, resources for conducting a study. It should get easier, not more complicated. You get more guidance, you get more prescriptiveness. You may not like it, but you can do it easier. That's the basic thinking behind. And that you can do only by realizing certain things. You need to define what is really relevant, and in turn, you can say as well, what is not that relevant that I need to bother and go out and find new data. That's the point. Make your life easier. That is related to the system boundaries. It's related to scenarios for use, end of life, where you don't have to do the same thing all and over again. You need to find guidance in the PEFCR on how to do it. Impact categories and additional environmental information, it needs to be clear what others have to look at. So the PEFCR is the document. After that, your life should become easier. Of course, the development of the PEFCR as well, I cannot promise it will be easy. With that, I think I want to close and thank you for your attention.